Let's go ahead to the GOP fundraising numbers, as Krystal alluded to. There's a lot to get into with all of the candidates, but the major and the top story here remains really the diminishing campaign of Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida and his need to turn things around, if that's even possible. Let's go and put this up there on the screen. It was reported on late Saturday night as all of the numbers became clear. Quote, DeSantis campaign sheds staff amid a cash crunch. Quote, fewer than 10, so AKA 10, staffers were let go Thursday, according to a person familiar with the campaign. They leaked it almost immediately to Politico, saying that many aides who were involved in event planning and in other deemed non-essential parts of the campaign were dropped from the DeSantis campaign. And actually, Krystal, in a really interesting turn of events, they almost immediately sent their resume over to the Ron DeSantis super PAC. Although, as a friend familiar with campaign finance law tells me, you do have to wait 120 days before immediately jumping from the campaign over to the super PAC, meaning that in this case, they do expect to be at least not employed by the campaign or be able to return to the apparatus for a period of 4 months, which is pretty stunning.
Yeah.
When you consider that.
That's a long time in campaign time.
The headline here is just so obvious. I mean, having to drop staff almost immediately after launch in the first quarter, despite not the worst fundraising haul, is a really bad sign. And it does also show a burn rate of nearly $1 million per month. The problem that the DeSantis campaign has right now is not only are they trying to fundraise for the GOP primary, Krystal, but they're also earmarking in the case that they, somehow do win the general election. So they have some of this cash that they were able to raise, they're having to set aside.
Right.
Of the existing pool, the burn rate remains high enough that they felt that they had to offload payroll, which was their biggest expense so far in this. And then the worst part, which I know that you can break down here, is that he has tapped many of his donors for the maximum amount. So the large top-line figure that DeSantis has gotten is not one that is going to be sustainable in the long run. So if you've already tapped your big donors and you still have to fire staff, you don't have enough to move forward, you're not in the best position right now as a campaign.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, the DeSantis people would look at the top line and say, hey, he raised a lot of money. He raised more money than almost any of the other contenders. However, if you dig a little bit beneath the surface, you see a few problems. Number one, very high burn rate. And that's a big problem. And that's why he's shedding staff, because we've seen this so many times before. The multiple Hillary Clinton campaigns come to mind. Actually, the Trump campaign last time around comes to mind, where you're just burning through cash. You just assume that there's going to be an endless money spigot. You staff up with way too many people, create way too much bureaucracy, and you blow through money way too quickly before most voters, frankly, are even really paying attention. So they're trying to trim back because they see the writing on the wall in terms of just they need a sustainable pace of operations. And then the other couple of pieces that Saagar's pointing to here is when you have money coming in directly to the campaign, there is a maximum amount you can give for the primary, and there's a maximum amount that you can give for the general election. So if you have given the total max of primary plus general, you have to reserve those funds that are meant for the general election. You have to set those aside. You cannot spend them in the primary, or else you'll be in violation of campaign finance law. And then the other piece that I think is really important here is that there's a very low rate of grassroots small dollar fundraising ability, which actually I'm a little bit surprised at, because I do think Ron DeSantis, he's well liked within the Republican Party. I do think he has some, base of support. But what we're seeing across the board with all of these fundraising numbers is actually there's a lot of grassroots fundraising fatigue. All of the candidates are seeing lower grassroots fundraising numbers. Joe Biden in particular, he's never been a grassroots fundraising juggernaut. We're going to talk more about that when we get to the Democrats here. But the fact that Ron DeSantis doesn't have this well of enthusiastic grassroots fundraising support, I think it's also indicative of a campaign that has had more success with the donor class at this point than it has with the actual Republican base.
Look, at the end of the day, the guy's only got 15% of his money coming in from small dollar donations. That's just not the sustainable path to actually be able to make payroll when you have such a high level of staff. DeSantis himself, being confronted with this on Fox News, which, as we've covered a lot here, has really taken a turn against the man. Here's what they had to say, and here was his response.
Oh, the governor doesn't do retail campaigning. He's not going to be able to go to Iowa. And then, yesterday I'm out there doing events. We have 30, 40 people at some of these things, shaking hands, answering questions, doing all that. They're like, oh, well, he can do it.
So 30, 40 people, that's what we're bragging about here in Iowa. I don't know,
I
Krystal,
don't know
30
that
to
that's
40.
the accolade you think.
That's not that's not the checkbox that we're going with. That number should be 300 to 400, and you really shouldn't be putting a man of Ron DeSantis' stature in a room of less than what, like 200 people. If you're, Asa Hutchinson or any of these other smaller candidates, then maybe. But if you are him, you really should not put him in a position where it can look like he's being embarrassed. Let's also put this Washington Post piece with a pretty deep dive into the DeSantis campaign up on the screen. And as they say, quote, the long slog inside the early struggles and the effort to rebound. As we have already noted, the initial launch on Twitter with Elon Musk was itself created a lot of media problems for the candidate just simply because it was like literally a failure to launch. His fundraisers were convened at the Four Seasons Miami, and then they had to wait for him because of the delay. None of it actually went up to schedule. Then the initial launch interview on Fox News itself probably should have been what he did the entire time, and then a traditional speech. But from that point forward, he has found his negatives drawn up with GOP primary voters. Yeah. He has seen his poll numbers continue to decline in almost every single GOP primary poll that has been held. Iowa polls that have since come out don't show him even close to neck and neck with the candidate, nor does the New Hampshire race. He's largely been able to only fundraise from big dollar donors that are able to max out, not having and built up a small dollar donation base, of which translating effectively the online energy to normal people who are actually willing to take their credit card out and say, I affirmatively want you to beat Donald Trump. So when you combine all of those three things together, and really just the slide after launch, which you almost never see happen, you almost always see some sort of bump happen post-launch and have energy. So we combine all of that, and you just see very, very difficult runway right now for Governor Ron DeSantis.
And you have basically all the media has decided right now is the moment to write their playbook is up with DeSantis in disarray. I saw a Bloomberg piece this morning. We just put the Washington Post piece up on the screen. Fox News obviously has moved off of him, and Republican donors are kind of holding their fire if they've supported him in the past and evaluating their options. There were some quotes in that Washington Post piece from donors who said that, one donor who co-hosted an event for DeSantis described hearing sentiments such as, what's going on? And does he even have a chance? The donor said he was trying to get other rich Republicans to give to DeSantis, but most wanted to keep their powder dry after his lackluster beginning. Remember, the donor class, their only ideology is protect themselves from taxes. So they want to be on the team with the winner. And they're worried about, okay, if it looks like Trump is going to win, we don't want to piss him off too much. We want to be able to maintain our access. Or if there's some other candidate, maybe a Tim Scott or somebody else out there that we can convince ourselves has a better chance, maybe we play both sides. Maybe we just stay out for a while and wait and see what happens. So if you're Ron DeSantis, and we know now from his fundraising report that he's really dependent on these large donors, and they're starting to back away, and the media is starting to write your obituary, and you don't have that, widespread grassroots support, you're just in a tough place. There's no other way around it. So that's how things are looking for him this morning. And it is always interesting how they just flip a switch on these narratives, and all of a sudden it's just total media okay, the writing is on the wall here. Obviously, we've been seeing warning signs literally from the beginning with this campaign, but I do think probably the trigger is when you have to lay off campaign staff.
It's undeniable. There's just you can't spin it. And for the DeSantis campaign, despite really shunning a lot of legacy media, let's go and put this up there on the screen. He will actually be sitting down with Jake Tapper, apparently, for an exclusive interview on Tuesday. Tapper says, quote, we have a lot to talk about. So I'm curious to see how it goes. Megyn Kelly apparently gave him some advice and said it publicly, saying that she thinks he should go on MSNBC and should fight. So
I think it's a good idea.
Let's see how he does. I want to see it.
Here's the thing is, he had this very play it safe strategy. It's almost like a prevent defense. But it's dude, you're losing. You don't play a prevent defense when you're behind. Right. So he was very reluctant to go in any at all adversarial spaces. He went with, the Murdoch properties that at least previously were 100% as supportive of him and was getting total softball questions. you got to take some risks. You got to shake it up. You got to show people. I do think that's something that the Republican base could respond to. If you're going in and you're mixing it up on MSNBC or in Lefty podcasts, listen, we'd love to have him here on Breaking Points.
That's right.
You know, the offer is out there for literally any of the presidential contenders. We would love to host them on this show, but he needs to just get out there, take every interview he can, and show what he's made of. Prove to the GOP base that he's the fighter that they really are still looking for.
It's time to get those dollar numbers up.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.